Customers walked past the ancient greeter like he was furniture. He was former FBI who caught a serial killer. Welcome back to the channel where everyday heroes get the recognition they deserve. Today's story proves that sometimes the person everyone treats as invisible is the one with the sharpest eyes. Drop a comment with your city and hit subscribe if stories about elderly heroes inspire you. George Patterson stood by the entrance of Walmart in Riverside, California, greeting customers with the patient smile of someone who understood that a friendly face could brighten people's day, even if most shoppers hurried past him without acknowledgment. At 82, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing arthritis and old injuries, spoke in the soft voice of a man who had learned to conserve his energy, and approached his greeter duties with what younger employees assumed was the simple routine of an elderly man who needed something to do with his time. To the thousands of customers who passed George each week, he was simply part of the store's fixtures, an old man in a blue vest who said, "Welcome to Walmart," to people too busy to respond, handed out shopping carts to customers who barely looked at him, and seemed like a relic from an earlier era when stores hired elderly workers out of charity rather than necessity. They walked past him as if he were furniture, spoke around him as if he couldn't hear, and treated him with the polite indifference often reserved for people assumed to be mentally declining. "That old greeter never says much," commented regular customer Jennifer Walsh, a busy mother who shopped at the store twice weekly. "Just stands there looking confused half the time. Probably doesn't even remember customers from one day to the next." Even store employees viewed George as a well-meaning but limited colleague who needed constant supervision and simple tasks. "George tries his best," said assistant manager Michael Chain, "but you have to explain everything to him 3 times. Sweet old guy, but definitely past his prime. We keep him around because corporate likes having elderly greeters for the image." The store manager, Patricia Williams, appreciated George's reliability, but assumed his careful attention to customer behavior reflected the paranoid hypervigilance common in elderly people, rather than any meaningful security awareness. "Patterson watches everyone who comes through those doors, but that's just because old people get suspicious of everything," she told district supervisors. "He probably thinks half our customers are shoplifters." What none of them knew was that Special Agent George Patterson had spent 38 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specializing in serial killer investigations, behavioral analysis, and criminal profiling that had led to the capture of some of America's most dangerous predators. George had developed profiles that solved dozens of murder cases, earned commendations for work that protected communities from violent criminals, and received advanced training in recognizing predatory behavior patterns that most people couldn't detect. He had retired from the Bureau after suffering a mild stroke that affected his mobility, but not his analytical abilities, choosing to work as a greeter because it allowed him to serve his community while using his observational skills to identify potential threats. George had taken the position at Walmart not just because he needed supplemental income and social interaction, but because large retail stores were natural hunting grounds for the kind of predators he had spent nearly 4 decades tracking. Every customer was automatically observed and assessed for behavioral indicators. Every unusual pattern was noted and evaluated, and every potential threat was identified using skills that had once protected American communities from serial killers, child predators, and violent criminals. The afternoon of Wednesday, November 8th, brought a customer whose behavior would test every lesson George had learned about recognizing dangerous predators, analyzing criminal patterns, and protecting innocent people from violence they never saw coming. At 3:45 p.m. during the busy after-school shopping period, George observed a man whose behavior immediately triggered every instinct he had developed during 38 years of hunting serial killers. The customer was a well-dressed man in his 40s who appeared normal to casual observers, but was displaying behavioral patterns that George's FBI training recognized as classic predatory surveillance. The man was not shopping for merchandise, but was systematically observing female customers, following them through the store, and showing particular interest in women who were shopping alone or with small children. George's 38 years of criminal profiling had taught him to recognize when someone was hunting rather than shopping. The man's movement patterns, target selection criteria, and surveillance techniques matched profiles that George had developed for serial killers who used retail environments to identify and stalk potential victims. Most concerning was the way the man was documenting his observations, taking photos of women's license plates in the parking lot, following them to their cars, and gathering information that could be used to track them to their homes. George recognized the behavior as the preparation phase that serial killers used before escalating to actual attacks. While other employees and customers remained completely oblivious to the predatory behavior happening around them, George began conducting discreet surveillance using techniques he had learned during decades of FBI fieldwork. He observed the suspect's methods, documented his target selection patterns, and began building a behavioral profile that would determine whether he was witnessing active predatory planning. What George noticed confirmed his worst fears. The man was displaying classic serial killer behaviors: systematic target assessment, detailed surveillance techniques, and the kind of methodical preparation that suggested he was planning attacks rather than conducting random observations. The suspect showed no interest in shopping, but intense focus on vulnerable women who matched specific criteria that George recognized from serial killer victim selection patterns. George faced a decision that brought back memories of every serial killer case he had worked during his FBI career. If he was right about what he was observing, women in the Riverside area were in immediate danger from a predator who was using Walmart to hunt for victims. If he was wrong, he was about to create a serious situation based on suspicions about a customer who might simply have unusual shopping habits. But George's 38 years of protecting communities from serial killers had taught him that the cost of ignoring predatory behavior was always measured in innocent lives lost to violence. He decided to act on his training and investigate further. George quietly approached Assistant Manager Michael Chen to report his concerns about the suspicious customer. "Michael, I need to discuss a potential security situation with you." "George, what's wrong?" Chen asked, speaking slowly and loudly, as he typically did when addressing the elderly greeter. "That man in the blue jacket near electronics has been conducting surveillance on female customers for over an hour. His behavior is consistent with predatory targeting patterns." Chen looked confused by George's terminology and professional assessment. "George, are you sure you're not just misunderstanding normal shopping behavior? Maybe he's looking for his wife or something." But George's FBI training had taught him to trust his analytical instincts when public safety was concerned. "Michael, I have experience with this type of behavior. We need to call law enforcement immediately." Chen was reluctant to involve police based on what he assumed were the confused observations of an elderly employee, but something in George's tone convinced him to take the concern seriously. Within 10 minutes, Riverside police arrived to investigate George's report. Officer Sarah Rodriguez found George's detailed behavioral analysis and professional terminology surprisingly sophisticated for a store greeter. "Mr. Patterson, can you walk me through what you observed and why you believe this individual poses a threat?" George provided a comprehensive briefing using the analytical framework he had developed during decades of FBI criminal profiling. He described the suspect's surveillance methods, target selection criteria, and behavioral indicators that suggested active predatory planning rather than normal customer activities. Officer Rodriguez: "Based on my observations, this individual is conducting systematic target assessment consistent with serial killer hunting patterns. His methods suggest advanced planning and potential escalation to violent crimes." Rodriguez was impressed by George's professional analysis and requested backup while establishing surveillance of the suspect. George's detailed documentation and behavioral expertise provided law enforcement with crucial intelligence for safely approaching and investigating the potential threat. The investigation revealed that George's assessment had been completely accurate. The suspect was David Mitchell, a registered sex offender who had been stalking women throughout Southern California while planning a series of attacks. His car contained restraint devices, weapons, and detailed surveillance notes on dozens of women he had been tracking through various retail locations. "Mr. Patterson," Detective Maria Santos told George as investigators processed the arrest, "your identification of this predator prevented what could have been multiple violent crimes. This individual had the tools and detailed plans for attacks on at least 6 different women." The FBI investigation that followed revealed Mitchell was connected to 3 unsolved murders in neighboring counties and had been escalating his predatory behavior towards serial killing. George's intervention had not only prevented future attacks, but had solved existing cases that had baffled investigators for months. When store employees learned about George's FBI background and his role in capturing a serial killer, their perception of the confused old greeter was completely transformed. Michael Chen felt profound embarrassment about his previous treatment of George. "I can't believe I talked to you like you didn't understand things," Chen admitted. "You were conducting a federal-level criminal investigation while I was treating you like you were senile." Patricia Williams called George into her office for a formal recognition meeting. "Agent Patterson, I owe you an apology. Your expertise and vigilance protected our customers and our community. I had no idea we had one of the FBI's most experienced criminal profilers working as our greeter. Regular customers like Jennifer Walsh were equally shocked when they learned about George's background. I walked past him every week, like he was invisible," Walsh told local news reporters. "He was protecting my family while I was treating him like he didn't matter." 6 months after capturing the serial killer, George received a visit from FBI Director Janet Martinez, who offered him a consulting position with the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit. "Your combination of field experience and public access makes you uniquely qualified," Director Martinez explained. "We need experienced profilers who can identify predatory behavior in everyday environments." George accepted a part-time consulting role that allowed him to maintain his greeter position while providing expertise to federal criminal investigations. Walmart became a training location where FBI agents learned to recognize predatory indicators in retail environments. The most important lesson George told groups of federal agents training at the store is that serial killers often hunt in plain sight by using public spaces where their behavior seems normal. The key is recognizing when observation patterns suggest predatory intent rather than legitimate shopping. George kept his FBI credentials and criminal profiling awards in a frame behind the customer service desk, not as displays of past glory, but as reminders that protecting innocent people was an ongoing mission. Every shift he worked at Walmart, he was still hunting predators, just using different methods and different environments than he had used as an active agent. The transformation in how customers and employees treated George was profound and permanent. Shoppers began stopping to thank him for his service and vigilance. Parents brought their children to meet him, explaining that he was a hero who kept families safe. "George taught me never to dismiss someone based on their age or current job," Michael Chen told new employees during training sessions. "The person you're underestimating might be the most qualified person in the building." 3 years after capturing Mitchell, George was honored by the California Attorney General's office for his contributions to public safety and violent crime prevention. The case became a model for recognizing predatory behavior in retail environments. The designation came with expanded responsibilities. George began teaching predator recognition classes for retail security professionals, showing store employees how to identify suspicious behavior without profiling innocent customers. Every retail worker who interacts with the public can help protect potential victims. George told his training audiences, "You don't need FBI training to notice when someone's behavior doesn't match normal shopping patterns or when customers seem to be stalking rather than shopping." Local and federal law enforcement agencies began referring potential serial crime cases to George for behavioral analysis, recognizing his expertise in criminal profiling and predator identification. The Riverside Walmart became a resource for investigating violent crimes throughout Southern California. People don't realize how much FBI profiling experience applies to public safety awareness, Detective Santos reflected during a later interview. George's training made him recognize patterns that could have continued for months without detection. His vigilance saved multiple lives. George continued working as a Walmart greeter with the same attention to detail that had once made him one of the FBI's most effective criminal profilers. Every customer was welcomed warmly, but observed carefully for predatory behavior. Every unusual pattern was noted and evaluated, and every potential threat was identified and addressed before innocent people could be harmed. The elderly man greeting you at the store entrance might look like any other retail worker, but his understanding of criminal behavior could be protecting your family with the experience of someone who spent decades hunting the most dangerous predators in America. Sometimes the person everyone treats as invisible is the one with the sharpest eyes watching over your safety. George Patterson proved that FBI investigative skills don't become obsolete when age slows the body. The abilities that made him effective at catching serial killers translated perfectly to recognizing predatory behavior and protecting the innocent shoppers who trusted him to keep them safe without ever knowing he was doing it. His story reminds us that law enforcement professionals carry their training and protective instincts into every job they take, often using their specialized knowledge in ways that seem unrelated to criminal investigation, but actually draw on exactly the same behavioral analysis techniques that once protected communities from the most dangerous criminals imaginable. Have you ever been greeted by a store employee who seemed unusually observant about customer behavior and security? George's story shows us that the person welcoming you might be someone whose training extends far beyond customer service. The greeter watching the entrance could be someone whose expertise once caught serial killers and continues to protect your community from predators who think elderly employees are too unimportant to notice their hunting behavior. Where are you watching from today? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know if you've ever encountered an elderly worker whose attention to detail suggested they were watching out for more than just customer satisfaction.